Let us pray. God, we thank you for this morning, and for the chance, Lord, to hear your word. I ask that my words will be your words, God, and that our hearts will be open to your gospel. In your Son's name we pray.
Amen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, the Good Shepherd text. Of all the biblical images that come to mind for Christians, I think that even all of society, the story of the Good Shepherd is probably the one that comes to mind the most often, right? See, in fact, it's a little daunting for someone to preach this text. I mean, what hasn't already been said? I mean, the image and the metaphor of a shepherd is probably only used in modern discussion anymore when used in a religious setting. Most of us don't have any sheep, and we don't know that much about what it takes to be a shepherd, right? This got me thinking, which is always dangerous, right? Strangely enough, this reading reminded me of automobiles. You see, Pastor Rick's laughing. See what happens when I think? You see, I have a television show that I love. It's called Top Gear. Have any of you seen it? Ring a bell? So we got some hands. It's good, yeah. Now, it's a car show from Britain where three middle-aged men do all sorts of challenges and different races and different, they review cars and they go on trips. And maybe you've seen it in the news lately, unfortunately. There was a little fracas between a producer and one of the main hosts, but that's besides the point. The text today made me think of a particular episode from this most recent of the series. Now in it, the three men take three GT cars, Grand Touring cars, and they use a BMW M6 Grand Coupe, a Nissan GTR, and a Bentley Continental V8 GTS. Now they drive across the Northern Territory in Australia, and they do a little cow herding. Now I don't know if that's technically being a shepherd, but bear with me, okay? It's the best I can do. Because I was trying to imagine, what does a modern-day shepherd look like? And I just kept thinking about this episode. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but we tend to forget how big Australia actually is. It's gigantic. And so the whole premise of the show was that these three would drive thousands of miles to help move some cows across some land. But these just weren't a few cows. Top Gear never does anything small, right? The farmers in Australia, they typically have around 1,000 square miles of land. And they each usually have around 20,000 cows. Now, the combined farming industry for these people, in an article from a few years ago, said that these groups, these farmers, consisted of roughly 30 million cows altogether. That's a whole lot of beef. I mean, even I would be happy there, right? Now, the unique way they herd these animals is fascinating. So in the show, the guys use their experience in cars to try and herd the cows across to a certain location. But in real life, the farmers use these very small helicopters. It's incredibly dangerous. And the average insurance cost for one of these guys is $2.5 million. So every year, at least 10 pilots die doing this. Because they fly so low to the ground that they maneuver so much trying to move these cows around that it's pretty risky. It's dangerous, it's risky, but are they a good shepherd? I kept wondering. You see, the loss of any life is something to be grieved, but I kept thinking about how different their death was from the death of Jesus Christ. These modern-day cowboys, they didn't give up their life willingly. Those were just accidents. How radically different is the self-sacrifice in today's text? Do any of us own something that we think is so valuable that we give our life for it? Would we die before something at our places of work were destroyed. Because that's what being a shepherd was. It was their calling, their job. It seems this type of sacrifice is only revered for things like our loved ones, right? We hear of sacrificing oneself for children or family or spouses. It's a heck of a challenge. And Jesus even repeats himself to make sure that we understand, because as we know, we don't do a good job of listening, right? 5 times he says that a good shepherd will lay down a shepherd's life. 5 times. Verses 11 to 18. It seems that we're not just called to be shepherds, but good ones, he says. And good shepherds willingly die for those under their care. Do we see our ministry here at Amazing Grace like that? Do we see what we're doing is so important that we're willing to die for it? What a pill to swallow this early in the morning, right? I hate to be the one to call us out, but sometimes the law just convicts us. And I'll be the first to say I don't think I take my ministry that seriously all the time. I'll be the first to say that I might be the one that runs away like the hired hand. For we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Amen? But the text challenges us even more. It ain't over, right? It works on a variety of different levels. You see, we often use the image of the self-sacrificing shepherd as the model for what our ministry and our daily lives should look like. But it's more than just that. In fact, we often forget that we aren't the good shepherd in today's text. We aren't even the hired hand. We're just the sheep. Listen to the text again. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, Jesus says. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And this is important. Verse 16. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. One flock. A flock where we are just one among many. You see, sometimes the church can get caught up in who's in and who's out. It's dangerous. And in today's text, Jesus reminds us that that decision isn't ours at all. We're just the sheep. I've often argued that the original sin, the first sin in the garden, and the one that continues to be the root of so much of what we do, is the same thing. The fruit gave them what they thought was the knowledge of good and bad and evil, right? Right and wrong. The reality is that only God can see a person's soul. We can't see into a person's heart. We don't know. A Jesuit priest at the undergrad that Megan and I went to had a saying. He would so often remind us that we don't know the half of it. So often the world argues over what the right thing to do is, rather than admitting that none of us have the perfect idea and that maybe we should just sit down together and pray about it. Today's text calls us out. Meta Stamper, in a commentary on this text, she writes this: the other sheep of John 10:16 leaves the door open to the readers and hearer of the gospel, and also warns against any kind of exclusive claim on the shepherd Jesus. Deciding who is in and who is out is really, this suggests, not the business of the sheep. It is a mystery to them. We sheepfolk are told only to cleave to Jesus, to love and to testify, as Jesus makes explicit in later chapters of John and in upcoming lectionary texts. So lectionary is a fancy word for the assigned readings that we get every week. So we'll hear more about this in the coming weeks. But now, we get some good news. Right? It's not too late. We can take up our sheepness once again, right? We can again remember that Christ is the one that centers our lives. And our only job is to make sure that we welcome and support all the sheep. Not just the ones who are Lutheran. Not just the ones who are Christian. Not just the ones in America. Not just the ones in Waxhaw or Indian Land. And not just the ones in this building. Not just the ones in our pew. Every single sheep. Jesus says they all know the shepherd's voice. Our job is to make sure they hear it. It's at this point that I think we can start to think about how, as a congregation, we can do that. And we need to remember that in the end, we're the sheep. That's important. And when we remember that we really aren't that cool in the first place, it's a little easier to swallow our egos, right? It's easier to remember that when we play the part of the Good Shepherd in our ministry in this church, we do it only to help draw and to point to the real Good Shepherd. We point to Christ. That's our job. Christianity is about forming a community that lives and dies for others. And that community accepts and welcomes all. Because we're all just a bunch of sheep, right? I'm no better than anyone else, and the fundamental idea makes it clear because of this. I need not even worry about who to welcome inside, right? Who to turn my nose up to. It doesn't matter anymore because I don't have to worry. It's actually pretty freeing when you think about it. Think about how different things would be if we just stopped judging others, deciding who was good and who didn't make the cut. What kind of community will we have here? What kind of community do we want to have? A lot of times people say that they don't want to be sheep. But maybe that's not such a bad thing anyway.